I never thought my life would collapse because of a decision I made out of love. Looking back now, I see how blind I was, how naive, how desperate to believe in the goodness of the people closest to me. If I had known then what I know now, I never would have opened that door for Jessica. But I did. I opened it wide, and she walked straight through it, dragging my heart behind her, only to shatter it in front of the man I trusted most at work. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 35 years old, born and raised in upstate New York, now living in Manhattan. I've been working in finance for almost a decade, and I've always been the dependable type. The man who shows up on time, does his job, and keeps his promises. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, but people respected me. At least, that's what I thought. Jessica, my wife, was 32. We'd been married for 6 years. She was beautiful in that way that made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. Blonde hair that always seemed like it belonged in a commercial, green eyes that could switch from sweet to sharp in a second, and a smile that once made me feel like I was the luckiest man alive. When I met her, she was working as a waitress while trying to break into marketing. She had dreams, ambitions, but life hadn't quite lined up for her. I admired that fire in her, that hunger for something bigger. We built a life together. A modest apartment in Brooklyn, dinners cooked together, weekends spent watching movies or visiting her family in New Jersey. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. And I truly believed it was enough for her. I believed I was enough. But marriage has a way of testing you in ways you don't expect. Around the beginning of last year, Jessica lost her part-time gig. She was frustrated, restless, spending long days at home scrolling job boards, complaining about wasted potential. I wanted to help. I wanted to be the husband who lifted her up, who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I worked at a mid-sized finance firm in Manhattan, and I had a good relationship with my boss, Richard Wallace. Richard was in his mid-40s, tall, charismatic, the kind of man who knew how to command a room. He was the type of boss everyone wanted to impress, smooth-talking, always dressed in sharp suits, always with a story that made you laugh even when you didn't want to. People looked up to him. I looked up to him. One day, during a lunch break, I mentioned Jessica's situation. I told him about her background in marketing, her creativity, her drive. He leaned back in his chair, smirking in that charming way of his, and said, "Bring her in, Mike. Let me meet her. Maybe there's a spot for her here." I can still remember the way relief washed over me. I thought it was fate, some kind of blessing. Finally, an opportunity to help my wife get back on her feet, and it was coming from someone I trusted. That night, when I told Jessica, her eyes lit up. She threw her arms around me, kissed me hard, and whispered, "You're the best husband in the world. I don't deserve you." Hearing those words nearly brought me to tears. If only I had known what those words would mean later. How hollow they really were. The following week, Jessica came in for an interview. She wore a navy blue dress that hugged her figure, and she looked stunning. I waited outside Richard's office, nervous but proud, like a parent waiting for a child's recital. An hour later, she came out smiling, cheeks flushed. Richard followed behind her, grinning. "Mike, you didn't tell me she was this talented," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "She's exactly what we need." Jessica got the job on the spot. Marketing associate. She would be working under Richard's department, but technically not reporting directly to me. At the time, I thought that was a good thing. It would keep things professional. The first few weeks were perfect. Jessica seemed happier than ever. She'd come home excited, telling me about projects she was working on, ideas she had, the way the office buzzed with energy. I loved hearing her talk like that. It felt like we were finally moving forward, finally building something together. But then little things started to change. She started dressing differently. At first, I thought it was just her wanting to look professional. Sleek skirts, fitted blouses, heels higher than I'd ever seen her wear. But then came the late nights. "We're staying late to finish a campaign," she'd say. Or, "Richard asked me to help him polish a pitch for tomorrow's meeting." I believed her. Of course I did. She was my wife. Why wouldn't I? Still, there were moments when something inside me stirred, an unease I couldn't explain. Like the night she came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. Or the time she laughed while texting, then quickly locked her phone when I asked what was funny. I told myself I was being paranoid. Jessica would never do that to me. And Richard? He was my boss, my mentor, almost a friend. He had a wife, kids, a reputation. Why would he risk it all? I swallowed the doubts. I focused on work, on being supportive, on keeping our marriage steady. Because that's who I was, the dependable man. The one who showed up. But looking back, I see now how every little change was a warning sign. How every extra hour at the office was a lie. How every time she smiled at me across the dinner table, she was already slipping away. And the worst part, I handed her over to him. I put her in his path. I opened the door and invited the wolf into my home. The first month of Jessica's new job felt like a blessing. She came home buzzing with energy, full of stories about brainstorming sessions, late-night coffee runs with the team, and the thrill of finally being part of something professional. I loved watching her eyes light up. It made me proud that I'd been able to give her that opportunity. But blessings have shadows. And sometimes, you don't see them until they've stretched so far across your life that you can't ignore them anymore. It started small, so small I told myself it wasn't worth mentioning. Jessica began leaving for work earlier than usual. At first, it was, I just want to get a head start. Then it became, Richard asked me to come in a little early. I didn't argue. Who was I to complain about my wife being ambitious? Wasn't this what I wanted for her? To finally feel useful, to finally chase her career? I even packed her coffee in a thermos some mornings, kissed her cheek, and told her how proud I was. But then came the late nights. At first, it was once or twice a week. We're working on a new campaign, it has to be perfect, she'd explain. Then it became almost every night. I'd be home alone, reheating leftovers, scrolling through TV channels, while Jessica texted me, "Don't wait up. Might be late." I tried to stay supportive. I told myself, this is temporary. She's proving herself. Richard just needs her input. But support started to feel a lot like loneliness. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise her. I cooked dinner, her favorite chicken Alfredo, and set the table with candles, just to remind her that we were still us, that we still had a life outside of work. I texted her, "Don't worry about dinner tonight, I've got something special planned." She didn't reply. Hours passed. The food got cold. The candles burned down to nothing. Around 10:30, she finally walked through the door, hair slightly messy, makeup smudged. She smelled faintly of cologne, not mine. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "At the office," she said quickly, dropping her bag on the counter. "We had to finish the presentation for Monday. Richard wanted it polished." I looked at her, my stomach tightening. "I texted you. Did you see it?" "Oh." She pulled out her phone, pretending to check. "Sorry, battery died." It was a lie, I knew it. The phone was glowing with notifications in her hand. But I swallowed it. I told myself not to start a fight. Instead, I pointed to the cold food. "I made dinner for us." She glanced at it, shrugged, and said, "I'm not hungry. I grabbed something earlier." Then she disappeared into the bedroom. I sat at the table alone, staring at the plates. And for the first time, a seed of anger planted itself in my chest. The changes kept coming. She started dressing differently, not just professional but alluring. Skirts that were a little shorter, tops that dipped a little lower. I told myself it was just confidence, that she was finally enjoying herself. But then she started buying clothes with my credit card without asking. Expensive heels, jewelry, designer bags. One Saturday morning, I confronted her. "Jess, we need to slow down with the spending," I said. "We're not rich. We need to think about the future." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go again. Michael the responsible. Michael the boring. You don't understand. I need to look the part if I'm going to succeed." "It's not about being boring, it's about being realistic," I said firmly. "We have bills. We have rent. We can't just—" "God, you sound just like my dad," she snapped, slamming her coffee cup on the counter. "Always telling me what I can't do, what I can't have. Maybe if you were more ambitious, we wouldn't have to worry about money." The words hit me like a punch. Ambitious? I was killing myself at work to give us a decent life. I was the reason she even had that job. And yet, in her eyes, I wasn't enough. That was the first time I saw her clearly. Not as the woman I married, but as someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. A week later, I overheard something at work that twisted the knife even deeper. I was in the break room pouring coffee when two coworkers walked in, laughing quietly. They didn't see me at first. "Jessica and Richard are practically joined at the hip these days," one said. "Tell me about it," the other replied. "She's always in his office, door closed." If I didn't know better. They both laughed. I froze. My hand trembled, coffee spilling onto the counter. When they finally noticed me, their laughter died. "Oh hey, Mike. Sorry, didn't see you there. They shuffled out quickly, leaving me alone with a pit in my stomach. I told myself they were just joking. That office gossip wasn't worth listening to. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The seed of suspicion was growing roots. That night, I checked Jessica's phone while she showered. I hated myself for it. I'd never invaded her privacy before. But desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. What I found made my blood run cold. A message from Richard. Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear that dress I like, winking face. Another. You're incredible. No one makes me feel like you do. I felt my chest tighten, like the walls were closing in. My wife. My boss. Together. I wanted to scream. To throw the phone at the wall. To storm into the bathroom and demand answers. But instead, I put the phone back, sat on the edge of the bed, and buried my face in my hands. Because the truth was already clear. I just wasn't ready to admit it. The following weeks were torture. I watched as Jessica slipped further and further away from me. She barely looked at me anymore. Conversations turned into arguments. She criticized everything I did, how I dressed, how I spoke, even how I ate. One night, she came home drunk, laughing to herself. Rough night? I asked. She smirked, kicking off her heels. You wouldn't understand. Try me. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, Richard says you'll never get anywhere in life because you're too safe. He's right, you know. You play it safe, Michael. You always have. That's why I have to go after what I want. The way she said his name, Richard, like it belonged on her lips, like it was something sweet. My stomach churned. You talk about me with him? I asked quietly. She shrugged. Maybe. At least he listens. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, fists clenched. The breaking point came at a company dinner. It was supposed to be a formal event, an awards ceremony for one of our biggest projects. Jessica insisted on coming, even though spouses weren't required. She showed up in a red dress that clung to her body, drawing every eye in the room. Throughout the night, she laughed too loudly at Richard's jokes, leaned in too close when he spoke, touched his arm like they were alone in the room. And Richard? He didn't stop her. He welcomed it. People noticed. I noticed. At one point, while Richard was giving a speech, Jessica leaned over and whispered, Doesn't he just command the room? God, he's amazing. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. When the night ended, I walked her out silent. She stumbled in her heels, giggling, and said, Don't be jealous, Michael. It's just fun. But there was nothing fun about the way she looked at him. Nothing fun about the way I felt, humiliated, betrayed, broken. By then, the signs weren't subtle anymore. They were glaring, neon bright. My wife was slipping out of my hands and into his, right in front of me. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. I gave her that job. I gave him access to her. I trusted them both. And now, I was the fool watching my life unravel. By the time winter rolled around, I was living with a stranger. Jessica still wore my ring, still came home to my apartment, still slept in my bed. But she wasn't my wife anymore. At least, not in the way she used to be. She had become distant, cold, and quick to anger. When she wasn't criticizing me, she was glued to her phone, smiling at texts I wasn't allowed to see. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself every marriage went through rough patches. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew the truth. I was being replaced. It wasn't just in my head. People at work had started noticing too. One afternoon, I was in the copy room when I overheard two junior associates whispering. Jessica's practically Richard's shadow these days, one said. Yeah, I swear, if she spends one more night in his office with the door closed. They both laughed. I stepped around the corner, pretending to need paper. They froze, their faces pale when they saw me. Oh, hey, Mike, one stammered. Didn't know you were there. I forced a smile, but inside my chest burned. The whispers were spreading. My humiliation wasn't just private anymore. It was becoming public. At home, Jessica's lies grew sloppier. One night she said she was working late. But when I drove past the office on my way home, the lights on our floor were out. I sat in my car across the street for over an hour, waiting. Finally, I saw her walk out, not alone but with Richard. They laughed together, his hand grazing the small of her back as they disappeared into the night. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. I wanted to follow them, but something held me back. Fear, maybe. Or pride. I didn't want to be the pathetic husband tailing his wife through the streets of Manhattan. Instead, I drove home and sat in the dark, waiting for her. When she finally stumbled in after midnight, hair messy, perfume mixed with a cologne I knew wasn't mine, she looked at me with fake surprise. "Oh, you're still up?" she said casually. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice low. "At the office." The office was dark. She froze for half a second, then smirked. "You followed me?" "I drove by. And I saw you." Her smirk turned into a scowl. "God, Michael, you're pathetic. Do you realize how insecure you sound right now? I told you we were working." "Working?" I repeated. "At a bar?" She rolled her eyes. "You don't get it. Richard values me. He includes me in things. Not everything happens in the office. But of course you wouldn't understand. You never do." I stood there, stunned, my chest aching. She wasn't even trying to hide her contempt anymore. The final crack came from her own phone. One Saturday morning, Jessica was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I told myself not to look, but my hands betrayed me. I picked it up, swiping at the screen before I could stop myself. It was a message from Richard. "Last night was unforgettable. Same time next week?" Attached was a photo. Not explicit, but damning. Jessica, in the same red dress she wore at the company dinner, smiling into the camera with a drink in her hand, Richard's arm draped possessively around her waist. My vision blurred. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. When she came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her body, humming to herself, I couldn't even look at her. I shoved the phone back onto the nightstand and forced myself to breathe. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't insecurity. It was real. My wife, the woman I loved, the woman I supported, the woman I gave everything to, was sleeping with my boss. And she didn't even care if I found out. The following days were torture. At work, I had to sit in meetings across from Richard, pretending to respect him while knowing what he was doing behind my back. I watched Jessica smile at him, lean close to whisper something in his ear, and laugh like I didn't exist. And the worst part, he looked right at me sometimes. Right at me with that smug little grin of his, like he knew I wouldn't do anything. Like I was too weak, too small, too afraid to confront him. He was right, at least for the moment. Because I didn't confront him. I didn't confront her. I swallowed the rage, the humiliation, the despair. I bottled it all up, carrying it like a weight on my chest. But I promised myself one thing. It wouldn't stay bottled forever. The final straw, the moment that erased any lingering doubt, came at the firm's holiday party. Jessica showed up late, once again in a dress that screamed for attention. She barely acknowledged me, instead spending the night glued to Richard's side. They drank together, whispered together, laughed together. At one point, Richard slipped his hand around her waist in plain view of half the office. People saw. People whispered. And me? I stood there with a drink in my hand, burning alive. When the night ended, Jessica staggered out to the curb, and Richard handed her into a cab like she belonged to him. He didn't even look at me. That night, lying awake in bed while she snored beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made a vow. They think I'm weak. They think I'm blind. But I see everything. And I will make them pay. It was no longer just suspicion. It was certainty. And certainty can be a dangerous thing, especially when it belongs to a man who has nothing left to lose. The night I caught them is seared into my memory like a scar that will never fade. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can still smell the faint mix of perfume and cologne in the air, still hear the sound of their laughter echoing through the office hallway. It plays in my mind like a broken record, reminding me of the exact moment my marriage, my career, and my trust in humanity all collapsed in one cruel instant. It was a Tuesday in late January, bitter cold outside. The kind of night where the wind cuts through your coat and every breath feels like ice in your lungs. I hadn't planned on going back to the office that evening, but fate has a twisted sense of humor. Jessica had texted me around 6 p.m. Don't wait up. Might be late again. Big deadline tomorrow. I stared at the message for a long time. By then, I didn't believe a single word she said. But instead of confronting her directly, I made a decision. I would drive to the office myself. Not to accuse. Not to fight. Just to see. To know. The building was almost empty when I arrived. Most of the lights were off, the lobby quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. My footsteps echoed as I made my way up to the 12th floor, the floor where both Richard and I worked. As I stepped off the elevator, I immediately noticed it, a light still glowing from Richard's office. My heart pounded against my ribs. I told myself it could be anything. Maybe they really were working. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe. But then I heard it. Laughter. Hers. High-pitched, familiar, playful in a way I hadn't heard in months. And then his deep and smug, the kind of laugh that dripped with arrogance. I walked slowly down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I froze. Through the glass, I could see the outline of two figures. Too close. Too intimate. I pushed the door open without knocking. And there it was. Jessica, perched on Richard's desk, her legs wrapped around his waist. His hands on her hips. Their lips locked together in a kiss so passionate, so deliberate, that they didn't even notice me at first. For a split second, my body shut down. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. My brain screamed at me to do something, but I just stood there, staring at the grotesque betrayal unfolding in front of me. Finally, Jessica's eyes flicked open. She saw me standing in the doorway, and instead of jumping back in shame, instead of crying or apologizing, she froze for only a second before sliding off the desk, adjusting her blouse like she'd just been caught borrowing a pen. "Michael," she said, her voice flat, almost annoyed. "What are you doing here?" What was I doing there? My wife, with my boss, in his office after hours, and that was her question? Richard, for his part, had the audacity to grin. "Mike," he said smoothly, like nothing was wrong. "Didn't expect to see you tonight." I felt the blood rush to my head, my fists clenching at my sides. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Jessica crossed her arms, her eyes cold. "Don't be dramatic. We were just what?" I snapped. "Just working? Just kissing? Just betraying me in the middle of my own office building." For the first time, a flicker of guilt crossed her face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by defiance. "You don't understand," she hissed. "Richard values me. He sees my potential. He's my boss." I shouted. "The man I trusted, the man I introduced you to, the man I—" Richard raised a hand, calm as ever, like he was trying to mediate a business deal. "Let's not get emotional, Mike. These things happen." "These things happen?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "You're sleeping with my wife." He shrugged as if it were nothing. As if I were nothing. Jessica stepped forward then, her expression twisted with frustration. "You're overreacting. You've been suffocating me, Michael. Always playing it safe, always stuck in your boring little routines. I needed more. Richard gives me more." Her words cut deeper than any knife. Suffocating her? I had bent over backwards to support her, to lift her up, to give her opportunities she never would have had without me. And this was how she repaid me, by spitting in my face and then blaming me for her betrayal. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to hit him. But instead, I stood there shaking, my whole body trembling with rage and heartbreak. "You're pathetic," I finally said, my voice low, staring at her. "Both of you." Jessica's lip curled into a smirk. "At least he's not afraid to take risks." That was it. That was the moment my love for her died. I turned and walked out of the office, my chest heaving, my vision blurry. Behind me, I heard her call my name once, but there was no desperation in her voice. Only irritation, like I was interrupting her fun. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind replayed the scene over and over. Her legs around him, his hands on her, the look on her face when she saw me. Not shock. Not shame. Just annoyance. By the time I reached the apartment, I felt hollow. Numb. Like my entire life had been stripped away in a single night. She came home hours later. I was sitting in the dark, waiting. When she walked in, she didn't even try to hide it anymore. She dropped her bag on the floor, tossed her coat over a chair, and sighed. "We need to talk," she said. I laughed bitterly. "Now you want to talk? Don't be childish, Michael," she snapped. "You were never going to understand. Richard and we have something real." "Real?" I scoffed. "You call sneaking around behind my back real?" She crossed her arms, glaring at me. "You don't get it. You've never gotten it. You're comfortable being average. But I'm not. I want more from life. And Richard can give it to me." For a moment, I just stared at her, unable to believe the words coming out of her mouth. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman who once told me I was her everything. This was a stranger. A selfish, manipulative stranger. "Then go to him," I said finally, my voice shaking. "If he's what you want, then go." Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe I will." She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I sat there in the dark, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. And for the first time since it all began, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel broken. I felt angry. Not the kind of anger that explodes and then fades. The kind of anger that simmers, steady and controlled. The kind that makes you think, makes you plan. Because that night, I realized something important. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't helpless. They thought they could humiliate me, destroy me, and get away with it. But they were wrong. Very wrong.